So it's a crazy time at the minute, as most of you will be aware, with the so-called Trump tariffs up and down, in and out. It's like the hokey cokey out there when it comes to Donald Trump's decision making and the financial markets. I'm very happy to be joined this morning for the second time by a fine Irishman who goes by the name of Killian Connolly. Last time we spoke, he was in a detention cell in Guantanamo Bay. You can check that out in one of our earlier videos. But thankfully, he's been released and he's back in his home this morning, I believe, looking a lot more relaxed and hopefully sounding a lot better. Killian, how are you doing?
Very good, very good. Despite the market volatility, we remain kind of steadfast and stiff upper lip through it all. So no, we're quite comfortable at the moment.
Good. And if you're wondering why he's talking about we, the proverbial we, he's not a member of the royal family. They refer to themselves as we. He is, however, a director of Price Value Partners, an asset management company based out of London. So we're going to talk a little bit about the markets, and we're going to focus on Ireland, what the outlook may be for Ireland in the interim period and also in the long-term period, what maybe the Irish government could or should be doing to hedge against any potential disasters coming down the line. And I suppose, Killian, no better place to start than the announcement that was made by the Donald himself. This was late last night. So the tariffs are on and off. There was league tables. Who was going to get hit the worst last week? Ireland, of course, were whacked with 20% tariff, being members of the EU. Northern Ireland, of course, technically speaking, at least in terms of this financial arrangement, they're not part of the EU, so they were going to get hit with 10%. But last night, Trump has said he will temporarily lower new tariffs on many countries, even as he raised them further on imports from China, a sudden reversal that sent US stocks sharply higher. So everyone else's tariffs are coming down a tad. They're not going away. 90-day negotiation period. China's is going up to 125% effective immediately. Is he being whimsical, or do you think this is a long-term strategy that Trump is employing to keep people on their toes, and, as he say, have leaders queuing up to kiss his ass because they're worried about what's coming?
Yeah, I mean, this is the worst kind of period in terms of not just, I mean, the volatility of the markets. Anyone who's been around '08, and then you had the European, in Ireland's point of view, the European debt crisis in 2012, the year there. But that's not really about like shifts in the economic landscape. And that's actually what Donald Trump has brought here since he's got elected. But obviously the announcement that was all, will he actually go through with it? Is this a negotiating tactic to get the dollar lower, which we do believe that's the ultimate aim here. But obviously that when it was on the Liberation Day or whatever, and he announced that raft of tariffs, the market just did not. That's a normal reaction, I think, to the market, because it's a sea change in economic policy. And at the same time, the market was looking vulnerable and weak. So it had been trading down to that point as well. So in terms of like, what is his kind of the overall kind of like objective here? I think, you've got to kind of take him at face value, because the tariff choices that he's making and the countries that he's making them against are in large part to reshore kind of some domestic jobs that had been outsourced by US corporations. So I think if you take it at face value, that's what he wants. What he also wants, I think, is a lower dollar, because the lower dollar will give him a bit of breathing room in terms of winning some trade against those partners. So against the European Union and against Japan, and ultimately against China as well. By lowering the price of the dollar, naturally, US exports have become a little bit cheaper vis-a-vis European exports. So there's two things. One is like he needs to talk down the dollar. So that means he needs to lean on the European Union and Japan and the other economies to talk up their currencies. I think that's something that's going on in negotiations at the moment. He's like saying, these tariffs could come in, but if you actually help me out by allowing the dollar, that may seem a bit strange to modern day kind of economic kind of participants, but that's something that was going on quite overtly in the 1970s and the 1980s. The dollar was in a snake agreement that all currencies it was a very fixed currency regime at that point. And then obviously in the 90s, we moved away to a floating exchange rate. So I think a lot of it is like he wants a lower dollar. He's using these tariffs as a way to get those kind of negotiations going on behind closed doors about how strong he wants the euro to be, how strong he wants the yen to be. But what he's clear about is tariffs are going up.
Mhm.
So they're going up, or the European Union and Japan are going to have to lower their tariffs. But the first opening salvo in any negotiation, you've got to go in hard. So I think that's where this 10% tariff is. It's going up, guys. You're going to have to get used to it because the US has been running chronic trade deficits, and obviously the budget deficits don't help as well.
Mhm.
So I think it's two-fanged approach here, and the one that has the flexibility to be negotiated down is these kind of like overt tariffs, the 20% for the European Union, the 100 and whatever percent
25,
for
125 now for China.
25%. So there is that scope. And in terms of what Ireland can do, I mean, we actually can't do much in terms of we don't have a seat at the table because that's a European Union conglomerate that will negotiate these tariffs down. We can kind of like ask for special privileges. We're going to get none. The European Union, Germany will decide this, and France, and that's the way everything is done since the European Union has been set up. It's been run for the benefit of the big boys, and that's the way these, when you pool your sovereignty, that's what you get.
Hmm.
So I think
Uh,
this.
you mentioned Liberation Day, which I believe was last Wednesday, so it hasn't just over a week ago that this fanfare was rolled out. He held up the chart, who was the real winners and losers and all this. But the one thing that was missing from that chart in particular was there were certain sectors were not factored in. So these tariffs were imposed on vehicles and Kerrygold butter and Irish whiskey, for example, but Big Pharma was noticeable in its absence from those. Of course, we've been told in the last week there will be a separate raft of tariffs that will be applied to, for example, pharmaceuticals. Now, Ireland is extremely dependent on the pharmaceutical industry. I believe Cork has 70% of the big pharma headquarters of the 10 big companies that are stationed in Ireland. 7 out of the 10 are stationed down in Cork, which is Micheál Martin's stomping ground. That's his constituency, as it were. And we've been told that they would be singled out for their own set of tariffs. Now, Trump has also been very clear. He did it when Martin met him at the White House to hand over the little Waterford crystal bowl with the shamrock in it. He made it very clear. He said, we've been taken advantage of by Ireland. They're smart people. The Irish are smart people. They've been taking advantage of them. And why wouldn't they? Because we had previously shambolic leadership in the shape and form of Joe Biden. He says, but now we want to bring back our great pharmaceutical industry. In fact, he used a great analogy. He said, Ireland's just this little island. It's got 5 or 6 million people on it. He says they have our whole farm industry in their grip. He said, we want to change that. We want to bring it back home again. So again, there's been a lot of nervousness around any potential announcement, which we've been told would happen in the next week or so concerning big pharma. Do you think that could be a flip flop as well? Or is he like, no, this industry's too big and too valuable and they do have a grip on it. We need to address that ASAP and get them back over to the US.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there's two markets that he has stipulated there are tariffs coming. One is semiconductors, one is pharmaceuticals. That's no surprise. There is no real semiconductor fabrication on mainland America. That is a disaster, and it's embarrassing that it's got to this stage. But you think of how digitalized and like the need of these high processing semiconductors in any walk of life now. You think of car manufacturing, you think in your home, everywhere needs semiconductors. And they've obviously a lot of the silica comes from China and then it's processed in Taiwan. And obviously with China being in the headlights here, then that is something that he is definitely trying to bring on shore. And that's where the problem for me comes from, because he's putting those two together, pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. And you could make an argument that maybe he's going to stand down from the pharmaceutical, but he's put them together. And I think it's because with Medicaid and Medicare and the provision of medication for domestic Americans, and there's a lot of his base that would be, taking an awful lot of medications as well, then maybe that's why it makes sense. And it's also a highly profitable industry, that the IP belongs in America. This is, Ireland needs to cop on a little bit because the way we talk about, well, we are the pharma hub and we seem to think, yeah, it's manufactured here and whatnot. But the real IP, the development, the actual ideas, the testing and whatnot, it's a very much American doctors and scientists that go down the route and do that. And so there's a reason why all of that IP, because I think if you look at, there's two things. One is the fact that obviously the lower tax in Ireland, he's looking at that saying, well, hold on, you should pay this American company, pay American taxes into our coffers. But then there's also the idea of the IP, as in it's licensed to Ireland, but at a cheaper rate. So therefore, Pfizer get the bulk of their profits in Ireland. And then they're paying lower corporation tax. So again, there's two factors as to why he's going after the pharmaceutical. So what we could do is part of the European Union. Again, this is the problem with pooling our sovereignty with Germany and France, is that we could say, okay, listen, these IP rules need to be kind of modified so that a lot more of the intellectual wealth of this remains in America. That could be something in these negotiations that we say, okay, we'll give you a little bit more. Sorry about that, Donald. We've been a bit naughty about that. But why don't you leave the tariffs down so that you could maybe get the tariffs down? I imagine the tariffs are going to come in over 20%. So there could be something egregious at the start, like 40, which would be obviously, like, and I use it lightly, problematic for the Irish economy. But then you come back and say, okay, let's do a deal on IP, because that's one of the other reasons why profits are being charged in Ireland and not just in America. So again, if there's a bit of light, a chink of light and positivity, is that we could do a deal on that. But again, the problem, and it is a problem in Ireland, and it's been a problem when we pooled sovereignty with Britain in the 1800s as well. We do not control this. And we are too much playing the good boys with France and Germany. We don't cause a ruckus, and therefore we get nothing from it. So and Germany are trying to negotiate. I mean, this whole tariff war is because Germany are trying to protect their automobile production, and France are trying to protect their food exports. And so they have huge tariffs against American production, and it's to protect their domestic economies. Now, Ireland, we're in the crosshairs here now, and we aren't getting any help from these guys. And I don't think we will. I think you'll see this escalate. Now, it's great to see that obviously there's been some acquiescence from European leaders to the Donald, and that's why he's not treating the European Union like he is treating China. But that notwithstanding, I don't think we're going to get a quick resolution. If it was Ireland, whiskey, say, we could have a normalized conversation and just be like, listen, let's do something. But even our whiskey is controlled by Germany and France. And maybe this will elicit some conversation about, and it's not just going to come from us. I think it's going to come from some European countries as well that are bigger than us, thankfully, saying what is the value of this European Union in its current structure. We haven't had that debate. We don't have that debate in Ireland at all. But I think once that pharma industry gets, let's call it cleansed of a lot of their profits, I think we will start to look at maybe functioning as a domestic economy and looking to see how we can use the power of the state to allow our domestic companies to flourish and not worry so much about the tax that the MNCs are paying for us. We're going to have to cut our suit to match our cloth, unfortunately.
I don't know if you've answered this question now in advance, but I put up a post last night on the channel to say I was going to be talking to you, and if anybody had any questions that they wanted to ask you, that to leave them in the comments, and I would throw them at you. So one of these questions coming from Kiki and Jasmine, who's one of my channel members, said, could you ask him, being yourself, Killian, what the potential risks are in relation to Ireland in the interim and the long term? What strategies our government should be implementing to hedge against such risks to lessen the impact on the country and invariably on the Irish taxpayers? And then he adds on a piece to say, I'd be amazed if any of these clowns in government knew anything about risk management. So listening to you talking, obviously you know this business inside out. When I see Micheál Martin, he looks like he's running scared all the time, or he looks like he's either holding in a fart or he's sucking on lemons, or maybe both at the same time. When you see Simon Harris, it doesn't exactly instill confidence that he's going over to DC, as he calls it at the minute. And if you saw him last night on social media, it looks like they haven't let him into the building, in Capitol building. He's standing on the lawn doing all of his interviews. I don't know if he was even allowed in. And of course, he was walking the streets of New York on St. Patrick's Day Well, Donald's favourite Irishman, Conor McGregor, was holding
Yeah,
court in the White House briefing room and explaining the evils of mass immigration and the
yeah.
destruction of rural Ireland. So it's an interesting setup. You did mention there about sovereignty. Ireland's sovereignty, too mixed in at the minute with the like of France and Germany. Maybe start to look at becoming a more standalone domestic economy. Sounds perfectly sensible to me. But do we have the team in place, i.e., in the Dáil, that could possibly even come close to making a little nugget of common sense manifest into reality?
No, no, unfortunately not.
Come
Is the
on,
short answer.
give us some hope.
Short answer. Well, I mean, like the
No,
thing
I
is, I
agree
mean,
with that. I agree. By the way, I'm joking.
it's very similar. I mean, Britain are outside of the European Union, but they are committing kind of economic harikiri as well. So the first thing we could do, obviously, and this is we were chatting on X or Twitter as I call it, about the energy price in Ireland. It's like 30% higher than, if not more, than the average EU country. So the easy, I think this is something we touched on last time it was on. Easy we can do is offer new licenses to drill gas and oil in the shores of Ireland. That's the easy win right there. Brings down the cost of gas. It will create new jobs, will create profit coming into, if they can find any. And I'd say there's plenty of gas lying around outside of Ireland. So there's certainly energy security we can work on. It's hard to see as I don't think the political we need to engender a lot of entrepreneurial activity in Ireland for sure because we're going to lose this pharma profit margin and employment, and that's 100% guaranteed at this stage. So there's no wishing you've got everyone going over trying to negotiate with Donald Trump. That's what we have to do. We have to kind of like do it on our terms and say we're gonna lean on the European Union, try and help you out, you help us out, blah blah blah. But in reality, it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse with those for those MNCs. So therefore, we need to engender, and the way you engender better entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, you can try and do it within Irish people, and get it into the zeitgeist. But in reality, you lower corporate tax and you bring in other European countries or even American companies that will start companies in Ireland. And we have a low corporate tax base, but I'm thinking you take it down to 1 or 2%. That may sound outrageous, but the 91% of our multinational our corporate tax take come from multinationals. So it's going to be decimated anyway. So you're going to have to, and weirdly, by lowering corporate tax, you generally get more corporate tax from your companies because a lot of companies are refusing to crystallize gains on their balance sheet. So you get that being brought forward. And also you get other country jurisdictions entrepreneurs from there. And the UK is losing a lot of entrepreneurs who are moving their companies offshore and moving themselves offshore at the moment because of the Labour Party. Ireland hasn't gone down the route of increasing corporate tax, but we need to get back to lowering it and getting domestic produce available. And even if that means bringing in more MNCs, that's fine. The pharma companies aren't coming, they're going to be going. But by lowering the corporate tax, we will bring more jobs into this country. But that seems, and again, not to bang on about the European Union, but the European Union is trying to harmonize to the upside our corporate tax. And so they won't like that. But again, all we have to do is play within the rules of the European Union, and they do not have. We currently still have tax sovereignty, so we need a lower corporate tax. Would be a silver bullet for us at the moment. But I don't even think we have the political leadership to do anything.
Yeah.
Like you can look at what Trump has done, and you can criticize it, but it is a huge policy shift. Like not until the 1970s have we had kind of like 80s Reagan or whatever putting American workers first. So he is doing that. We've got the same guys who were in charge for the last, it feels like 25 years, and they're offering the same solutions, which are not real solutions for where we are.
It's grim, and that's the problem. Common sense and realistic solutions that you're talking about here sound good to me. I would say sound good to the vast majority of people that are listening. But for example, when you reference oil and gas production, they would rather build a wind turbine or stick
Yeah.
solar panels in a field somewhere or stop people digging up peat or burning turf. That's the mindset, and you can't they say there's an old saying, I don't know if it's Mark Twain or not, it says never argue with an idiot because they will drag you down to their level and then beat you with experience. And I think what you're talking about, that coalition hell ensemble that's
Yeah.
in the doll at the minute. It just seems to be there's no semblance of any when you look at who's there, when you look at Simon Harris, when you look at Micheál Martin, when
Mm.
you look at Helen McEntee or Norma Full, any of them. I mean, it's
Mm.
hard to look at any of them and say, you know what, I've got a little bit. Well, there's maybe light at the end of the tunnel with that
There's
one. It's
nothing.
just it's darkness and a void when I see and hear them. Or maybe it's just me being hard on the government. What do you think?
No, I think, I mean, if you think about the two principal parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they haven't a clue. One of them led us into an economic nightmare not so long ago, and the other one has just been in charge and done nothing. Now, they benefited from the pharmaceutical. It wasn't just the pharma that they brought in, but it was just a case of that industry had a boom time since 2012 when we were on our knees in corporate tax take as well. So they really benefited from that. Not give like you probably have to give that to the early 2000s, back to Fianna Fáil, the credit for that. But no, the opposition in terms of so you've got the principal government, awful, they're not going to do anything. And then you've got Sinn Féin that would bring us higher. They would actually increase corporate, they would do everything wrong. They'd increase corporate tax. They have no problem with the losing sovereignty to the European Union. And they would like bang on about climate change as well. They're an opposition in name only. And I mean, I can get like this, the speaker time or the opposition time, who brouhaha in Parliament. The government are completely like taking the piss with that,
They
and I
are.
understand why you have to actually stand up to them a bit, but that's all they're doing. I mean, they don't offer. I mean, they're kind of right to be going at the government because it really is taking the piss out of them, but. There's nothing else they're doing, and that's probably why they're focusing on this one issue because they've got no criticism of it other than you're not going to build all those houses. But the reason we have a housing crisis in Ireland is because there's so much regulation. It's the government is and the state is so heavily involved in housing provision and is so heavily involved in health provision. The outcome of both of those are awful. You've got, hospitals refusing to be built after 10 or
Yeah.
however many years, and yet they become more expensive by 1 billion each year, it seems. And you're like, well, this is only a government could actually have got us into this mess. So
And
I wouldn't look at the opposition.
CHI, Children's Health Ireland, this huge new hospital, you touched on it. I think you're referring to the one in Dublin
Yeah,
that's years behind schedule in terms of building, and I don't know how many hundreds of millions, if not billions of euro over budget that this thing has went. But there was a whole hoo-ha yesterday about some surgeon in a Dublin hospital had been literally experimenting on children with scoliosis, inserting unregulated and untested springs into their backs as an experimental type of surgery. No ethics committee. There had to be a whistleblower. There'd been a previous investigation. Nothing. This guy was doing that, and that's what we know of. And somebody made the point yesterday to say, well, if we can't be sure of governance
yeah,
with children's health, for example, at the very, very basic level, how can we trust that organization to, for example, to finish building and to run successfully a humongous hospital like the one that they're proposing, the Children's Hospital in Dublin? Again, I think there's, Killian, a complete lack of faith in the government and the opposition from most of the voter base in Ireland. However, the question keeps getting asked, well, that's not what the electorate said
yeah,
last
yeah,
November. The same people got in. In fact, I think Helen McEntee, for example, and possibly Simon Harris increased their vote share
yeah.
allegedly in their respective constituencies, despite a horrendous run at their prospective posts. I think Harris was Taoiseach for a while. McEntee was the Justice Minister, telling us Dublin was safe, walking around with about 600 armed guards when she was taking a tour of O'Connell Street. And as you know, it's just Knife City since then. So there's another question I have here. I want to try and ask you a couple of these. Well, this one's to do with banks, right? So
Okay.
this is somebody, a Saxon Celt is their name. They said, "Why should we give a toss about banks and stock markets?" You're in the stock market industry, so I'm asking you this directly. Why the
Yeah.
hell should we care about banks and stock markets? They literally hollow out a whole country's democracy from within. They push globalization and its consequences. Then, when they crash, we have to bail them out again. They're even more evil than the government. So maybe this guy or this lady's insinuating that you're even more heinous than the like of Micheal Martin operating in the murky waters of the stock market as you do. So what do you have to say to that?
Guilty is
I
challenged.
like honesty. We like honesty. He's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
this guy's good. He's an honest guy.
That's a good impression. No, I think there's, by the way, quite right. I think the bailout of the banks in '08, and I think I think that's maybe why Donald kind of moved a little bit yesterday as well. There's companies, I mean, like the provision of kind of financial services, say, like not to talk our shop, but our clients are normal people, right? So people with pensions, people with savings that do not know what the hell is going on, and they think we know better, so they obviously use our services.
Mhm.
That's a normalized relationship. Whereas I think the what your subscriber is talking about is these hedge funds and these investment banks that blew us up in 2008, taking bets on CLOs and all these different exotic debt instruments that pretty much went and lost 50% of their money and wiped the likes of JP Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of Ireland, all the kind of normal banking system got infected with these products and these casinos, and they should have gone under. They would have gone under if there hadn't been a big bailout. So that analysis is really fair, and it doesn't impact economic growth. If you think of economic growth, it's how you build your capital structure. So land, labor, capital, those are the three factors of production. And then you produce a certain amount of output that we call GDP. Having a bank in there, and especially these casino banks, if they vanish tomorrow, I remember in 2008 there was after the crisis, so in the middle and shortly afterwards, there was all these economists gets rolled out and they are employed by these banks and they go, well, if we don't do something, we know what happens. It was called the Middle Ages. It was the Dark Ages. And you're like, well, that is such bullshit, because in order, you'd have to have complete capital destruction. You'd have to go through what Gaza is going through. You'd have to go through what Ukraine is going through for you to have a dark ages, because that's your capital base being completely destroyed by missiles and your labor, your people being destroyed. That's what leads to economic downturns. The idea that the price of certain instruments in the stock market have a feedback loop is again what they want to tell you. The Fed talks about the wealth effect. But the Fed is looking after the interest of money and interest of banks that it is the owner of, and they are the owner of the Fed as well. So this idea that the stock market impacts economic growth, maybe it does, but who cares? Who cares? Maybe we lose a couple of percentage points by letting some of these banks fail. That's okay. There's nothing. If you think about economic growth and GDP, it's just the collection of all the revenues of all corporate Ireland, corporate America. So if it falls 2%, if your company falls 2% revenue, my company, the Price Value Partners lose 2% in revenue, it's not a game changer. It's really not. And yet they make it out to be these crises because all they want is more like cheap funding or even bailouts from the government. So the analysis by your subscriber is quite right. We don't need them. We keep on being forced to do them, but that's because these financial interests are powerful and they own the media. So they keep on trying to scare us. But we need more leaders that understand that. And I think weirdly, although he did move a little bit yesterday on the back of the volatility of the market, but more people like Donald Trump who are actually like him or loathe him, he's a businessman.
Mhm.
He's not from the markets,
Mhm.
so you can probably see through a lot of this bluster.
Yeah. It's interesting as well. What I've noticed personally, speaking about this particular YouTube channel, for example, it's grown quite a lot in a short space of time. And
Mm.
used to be, you'd be able to filter through it. You put a video up, you'd look at all the comments. You might have had a couple of dozen or whatever. Now, no joke, you're talking about thousands every couple of days. Sometimes you put a
Mm.
post up. Put one up last week and it's got 3,000 odd comments. You can't get through all of those
Yeah,
comments
yeah.
if you're doing two or three a day. But what I have noticed is skimming through them, there seems to be a mindset among, sensible thinking Irish people to say, you know what, if massive pain is coming, maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Mm.
Maybe it will jolt the slumbering masses awake if their bubbles all burst. And a lot of people think things are great in Ireland. They've probably got a few quid in the bank, maybe own their own houses. They're in areas that aren't affected by deprivation and IPO or not IPOs, IPAS centres or migrant camps, whatever, and people are asking, what's it going to take? What is it going to take for people to actually see this government for what they are? And many are saying, well, maybe it's going to take a massive
Yeah.
collapse. And if that's what it takes, to get people to wake up and to get rid of this, malignant government that are in place at the minute that's running Ireland down into the ground, it seems to be, Killian, many people would be happy with Pharma pulling out. Many people would be happy with the Irish economy going through
Yeah.
hell, not because they want pain, but because they realize it's Trump keeps using these medical analogies like, short-term pain for
Yeah.
long-term gain, and you got to take your medicine and this, that, and the other. Suppose it's like an amputation. If your lower legs got gangrene,
Mm.
okay, if you don't cut it off below the knee, your whole body's going to die. Now, it's going to
Yeah.
mean you hobble around life with missing a leg, or you need a
Mm.
prosthetic on there. But the alternative is, if you don't remove that
Yeah.
malignant part of your body, the whole body's going to die. I think that's the mindset a lot of people have at the minute. We're at that point.
Yeah, and I was listening to one of those gripped conversations, and they were kind of like saying, "Oh, be careful what you wish for," and all that
Mm.
crap or whatever. But that's not the point here. Is that this is not working for Irish people. These guys are not coming up with the solutions that we need. And actually, I don't know whether it's not going to be like in the next 5 years, nothing's going to change in Ireland politically, barring a revolution. But what you could see is, weirdly, if we are struggling and we have a financial crisis and the government has to default on the debt, that's the only probably way out of this. The government can't continue to give money from Irish taxpayers to asylum seekers coming in from, economic migrants that aren't really fleeing anything that has anything to do with Ireland, for sure, anyway. So all of these, the government, if it loses all the tax revenue, not all the tax revenue, but if it has a large chunk of its tax revenue falling, it has to cut. And the Irish people will hopefully not allow it to cut domestic assistance, and will eventually say, listen, we can't help with the immigration crisis and all these people rocking up here, like from England basically, and from
Yeah.
Britain, who are just getting a boat across, and they're saying, okay, well, we'll take whatever you have. That is approaching the end, but maybe it does need, as you were saying, a kind of cleansing from a
Hmm.
financial economic point of view, and then see where we are afterwards. And there's such a lack of kind of empathy with Irish people who are struggling today. And there's that gripped podcast I was listening to is like, be careful what would happen to Irish kind of civil society. But we're not that is really looking at us down their nose at kind of working class and lower middle class people, as in we're going to vote for Hitler if dot dot dot. It's just not the case. Is that we're a Christian nation, we're a nice nation, and all we were trying to do is just get policies that protect us and allow us to kind of have a good economic outlook. But the Irish government is acting against our interests, especially with the immigration crisis and the housing crisis and the energy crisis and dot dot. Well, the trade
Yeah.
crisis now.
That's the evidence is there for people to see, but I suppose there's that old saying, out of sight, out of mind. If you're sitting in a nice little rural area, you've got a big pension fund, you've got no debt, you've owned your own car, your family's all, you don't worry about stuff like that the same
Yeah.
way as somebody does, for example, that's living in inner or trying to work and live in inner city Dublin, worrying about crime, not being able to afford a two-bedroom apartment at €2,800
That's
a month, or a
ridiculous.
one-bedroom apartment, and job uncertainty. So the last question I have that I am going to ask you here again is from another subscriber. Is what's going on with Trump at the minute, at least partially, a strategy to deliberately collapse the system to introduce digital currency? And this is something that's been looming for quite some few years now. Digital currency. Tony Blair, his institute, is pushing hard at the minute, even today, for
Mm.
digital IDs. This is one way to close the borders and police them. We need digital
Yeah,
IDs.
yeah.
One way to make sure everybody's getting access to digital IDs. They've been banging on about it. It's not an easy one to get through. But unless you have the digital IDs, you can't have the digital currency. So one thing must, I
Yeah,
believe,
yeah.
come before the other.
Yeah.
So at the minute, the digital currency, I don't think is something that's going to happen. It's just the infrastructure's not there, even if they wanted to implement it, to do it today. But it is seems to be something that they're pushing towards, at least on a softly approach. What do you think about that, or is that just a crazy conspiracy theory?
Well, I think I wouldn't come up from the point. I mean, Tony Blair, anything he said, I mean, that guy should be. The people talk about The Hague. I've got easier solutions for Tony Blair and
Oh
Alistair
yeah,
Campbell than locking them up. But so I would come from it from the point of view that the currency situation is already digital, right? So the central banks create it, the banks create more, M2 on top of that. So it's what it. So some of these terms I would just be like, well, digital's already here,
yeah,
mate. I think what the nuance could be is that they can just turn off your bank account if you
yeah.
a bit like in Canada or whatever stuff.
Hmm.
So that's already happening in Canada. There's probably some, white paper about how you could do that in Ireland or the European Union. So that is a concern. The original question kind of is Trump trying to engender some kind of a crisis? I don't think so. I don't think, and that's why I think yesterday was the proof that he didn't want that. I think some big hedge funds are blowing up on the back of bond yields are rising, not falling. So the economy is so complex, and then the financial markets, the bond market and the stock market on top are even more complex. So you have this layered complexity that no one can, no human, no Donald Trump or whatever can actually predict what's going to happen here. So I think he rode back a little bit because it was getting a bit too volatile in the financial markets. But I don't think it serves his purpose and that's why I think the maybe another proof of that he doesn't want to blow up the U.S. economy is even though Doge have highlighted a lot of spending kind of malfeasance, he has let the spending continue. So Doge, even though the headlines are saying they've found more kind of like fraud and whatnot, the spending is ticking up in the US just as it was last year. So there's no like the deficit is a continuing problem. The fiscal deficit is a continuing problem, and he's not stupid. If he cuts the spending, even if it is to some trans ideologue in Kentucky who's putting on a pantomime for Cinderella with trans people, that is spending that is going on in the economy. So he doesn't really want to cut it. So I think the U.S. economy he's trying to make it fairer, but I think the train has gone off the tracks already.
Yeah.
This is going to be bad, and it's going to be very bad. And I think out of it, the only thing that we can hope for is that out of it, and you can profit from it. Not to talk our shop, but I think as well, Rick. You can buy investments that haven't been juiced up for the last decade and a half. And I talk about commodities here. So there are things that can work in this new paradigm,
Yeah.
but it's going to be very, very tough for corporate America and hopefully a little bit better for the workers. But let's be honest, if corporate America is struggling, that leads to unemployment. And what maybe I hope comes out of this, and in Ireland especially, is more of a community solution to a lot of these problems.
Yeah.
That we take care of ourselves, even if the government goes bankrupt, as it will do, the state will go bankrupt for sure. We will look after ourselves, and that will engender a better Ireland. It's not just I've paid 50% of my tax. I don't. I've done my stuff. I don't care about all the problems in Ireland. That's short-sighted because I think we're going to all have to care a lot about the problems in Ireland over the next decade.
I think that's really what's burning in a lot of people's hearts at the minute. Again, it's like, okay, we'll take a hit, we'll take a collapse if it means we get to the scenario that you have just outlined.
Yeah,
We're more self-sufficient, we're more independent, we're looking out for each other more, and we're at least governed by people that have a modicum of sense
yeah,
instead of these mavericks that are just literally treacherous mavericks that have everyone's interests, their interests above and beyond everybody else's. So the whole thing with the, collapsing the economies to bring in digital, it couldn't happen overnight anyway, even if globalists wanted it to happen. But you also mentioned the Canadian truckers, for example, in the Ottawa Freedom protest back in February 2022, I believe that was. The sinister aspect of that was the government used shutting off of finances, shutting off of bank accounts to silence and disperse dissenters. That
yeah,
was the thing. They weaponized the banking system, the PIN numbers,
yeah,
the hole in the wall cards, the commercial vehicle licenses at the push of a button
yeah,
to
yeah,
effectively render people, financially incompetent or they couldn't transact. And the same thing's happening, by the way, with Enoch Burke at the minute. I don't know if you've been following
yeah,
his
yeah,
story,
yeah,
but
yeah,
they froze. He did a little video where he went to his bank in, I think it was Castlebar in County Mayo, and he put the
yeah,
thing in, and all his savings were gone. His balance was
yeah,
zero. It was 40,000 euro the day before, and his salary's been taken to pay for court fees. So they can just bypass it now. They're investigating his other assets to recoup back unpaid fines and this, that, and the other. So again, that frightens people. The
Yeah.
thought of going to the bank and not getting any money out or having your accounts frozen or worse, you log on in the morning and your balance
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
zero.
And you know what
Uh,
the alternative is? You put your money in the stock market or you make investments. So cash is there. Used to get a proper rate of return. It was lent out, blah blah
mhm,
blah. And then now more and more people are like, okay, well, that's a risk. If I don't share the same political stupidity as the government, I could be challenged at some stage, like in Canada. And then also, geez, it's getting eroded by money printing. Let me go and play in the stock market. And then you wake up and you're down 15% in two
mhm.
weeks, and that didn't feel good.
No.
And you're panicking, and then you're rushing around. It is a horrible time to have any savings
Mhm,
because of those two factors that we're being pushed to play the casino in the market without really understanding what we're doing there.
mhm.
So it's very. I mean, I just think a lot of those stuff we're talking about, they're already here.
Yeah.
The government's already doing that, and we aren't waking up. So I think but there is. I mean, there's a lot of ruin in the country. I think that was Adam Smith who said that Ireland is. There's no semblance that it's going to get much better until we make it better
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
But we are. Donald Trump, like him or loathe him, is showing that you can, with the right kind of leadership, you can change stuff, whether it's for the good or the bad, or whether the economy grows or not. You can do it, and then hopefully, in France they keep on, or sorry, in Europe they keep on imprisoning leaders who
Yeah.
might kind of change stuff. But the pendulum should start swinging back in our favor in
Has to.
due course.
Has to.
Has to.
Everything's cyclical, isn't it?
It
What goes
is.
up must
It
come
is.
down, and what's down must go back up. And it's just that cycle. Unfortunately, we're in that weak men creating hard
Yeah, yeah,
times portion of
yeah.
the cycle. But assuming we get past that, better days. I mean, I can't see. Well, things can still get worse, but they're well down at the minute.
I
So
think
let's hope the only way is up,
it's
as
the
Jazz
momentum
says.
is slowing, so it's getting worse, but it's not getting dramatically worse. So you can see a positivity. Momentum could actually start getting positive soon enough, but
Well,
we'll see.
let's hope for it anyway. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I'll leave a link through to your website at the bottom of the description box. So check out the description box underneath that this video. Price Value Partners Asset Management Company. Killian is a director of them, and as you can tell, a thoroughly decent chap. At least that's the impression that he's giving people, as most good psychopaths do. But Killian, thank you so much for your time again. And for now, this is me, Rick Munn, No Risk, No Reward Media, over and out.